Alrighty, we are live once again. Awesome. Looks good. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for tuning into this week's live stream. We're going to be continuing our kind of fall exploration and kind of photography journey that we've been going on these last couple weeks. To kind of recap the last couple weeks, actually, for those who haven't tuned in or haven't gone back and watched. Week one, we discussed how to location scout and plan out peak fall colors to assure that you're going to be going out at the right time for photographing, this fall season. And then last week we talked about what accessories you should bring in regards to capturing your images. This week I want to kind of continue on with that. And here in Madison, we actually had our peak fall colors kind of come around this week, and kind of the last couple of weeks have been just beautiful around here. So I've decided that this week I want to focus on what comes after you've gone out and shot. So the focus today is I'm going to be sharing my 3 biggest tips when it comes to post-processing your fall images. Now for this, we are going to be using Adobe Lightroom. For those who aren't familiar with Lightroom or what the plan that Adobe has to offer, Lightroom is basically, I'll say, the #1 or the gold standard for editing. It kind of works alongside with Photoshop in certain ways. Other photographers will also use Capture One or Luminar. However, Lightroom has been around the longest, and I would still say it kind of carries the umbrella for what most people are using to edit. So we're going to be using Lightroom Classic today to go ahead and edit. But in regards to that, for those who don't have Adobe Lightroom, the easiest way to go about looking into that, or at least trying a trial of it, is simply going online and searching Adobe's Creative Cloud, and they have a plan called the Photographer's Plan. Now, for $10 a month, you do get Adobe Lightroom CC. If you want to be a bit more ambitious and take the more advanced and full package, for $20 a month, Adobe has another plan that includes both Lightroom CC, which is their cloud version, as well as it also includes their classic version, which is what we will be using today. In addition, it also comes with Photoshop, as well as 20 gigabytes or 1 terabyte of cloud storage, whichever one you decide you want to go with. So with that being said, that's kind of an overview of what Lightroom is and how to get a hold of it if you haven't yet. Again, Adobe does offer a trial, so if you want to kind of play around with that and see, I highly implore you try that. But without further ado, let's jump in and actually go ahead and look at some of these photos. So let me go ahead here and get my screen shared for everyone. And we are just going to go ahead and jump straight into Lightroom. So these are some of the shots that I have found to be most beneficial in regards to sharing these tips. Now, the tips that I want to talk about today are understanding your highlights and your shadows with editing. We're going to be talking about the HSL tab, or the hue, saturation, and luminance tab. And then we are going to be talking about the importance of white balance. So the first one I want to talk about is highlights and shadows. And I have some images here from some of my past fall shots that I believe are going to work well for this. So we have a couple from up in Rib Mountain State Park, which is up near Wausau. And then we also have some shots up from Door County, specifically these 3 shots, as well as this one. So we'll be bouncing back and forth between these, but the first one that I want to start with is going to be this shot here. Now, this morning when I went out and shot, I had noticed that the leaves were still starting to fall and there was a lot of green that was still evident. So the focus of this one was to go ahead and kind of single out color if I could find it. And lo and behold, I was able to go or get away with this single leaf right here. So the first thing I really want to be able to do with this, though, is I want to emphasize that color with that leaf. And the easiest way to go about doing that is if I scroll down on Lightroom, under my HSL or color tab here, you will notice that I can go ahead and I can adjust every color individually. So with that being said, I'm going to look at not just the color of the leaf, but I'm also going to look at the colors that's surrounding the leaf, which in this instance is heavily the color green. So what I can do is I can either go ahead and look at all these tabs, or for me personally, a way that I kind of notice things are a little easier to navigate, I'll switch over from where it says HSL, and I will switch over to where it says color specifically. It's the same exact operation, except it's a little easier to navigate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to green. And if you notice here, I have 3 options for my green color. I have hue, saturation, and luminance. Now, if you notice when I change my hue, look what happens to the green slider, to the greens. The only color that is being altered right now is the color green. Same thing with saturation. If I want to basically mute all of the green, I can do that with that. Or if I want to boost the green, I can do it that way as well. Same thing with luminance. If I want to brighten up and make those colors kind of pop, I can go in that sense. Or if I want to mute them, I can go ahead and do that as well. So what I want to do for this is I want to really pop up that green, but I want to have a sharp contrast with orange. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really boost up the greens in this and bring down my luminance a bit. And just to kind of look at a before and after, this is how it started and this is where we're at already. And that's just with changing a little bit of color. And already I'm noticing that it looks more genuine to the color green that I remember that morning, as well as it's already going to be offering a bit more contrast between the green and the orange. Now, last but not least, though, we can't actually go ahead, though, and we can't work this orange without adjusting the colors. So let's go ahead and let's look at the HSLs of the color orange on this leaf here. Again, if I take my saturation specifically and I boost it, what you'll notice here is automatically this leaf becomes extremely orange. In fact, I think I like that really hard orange more than just kind of that dead look to it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to bump the saturation up basically all the way. And what I've discovered is the easiest way to kind of figure this out is just play around with it. See what happens if I bring it all the way up. See what happens when I bring it all the way down. Now for this, in all honesty, I like the look of it when I really bump the saturation of it. And I really like the look of it when I bring up the luminance. So I'm going to hold those colors there. Now hue is tricky and it's interesting though, because a bit of a trade secret is if you want to kind of, I'll say, cheat for fall colors, you can go ahead actually and you can change the hues of yellows and change them to orange, and you can change orange to red. And if you really wanted to, you could change green to a more of a yellow color. So if I really wanted to make this pop even more, I could actually take this orange hue and I could make this more red. And now it looks like I found a red leaf sitting there. But I've tried to stay as genuine as I can, so I'm not going to adjust this too much. I'm just going to go find a bit more of a true orange, which I think looks good right there. So with that, we've gone from this to this. And I must say, I like the colors in this a lot more. I like how it looks here with the faded background, as well as that orange really pops. So that's my first tip is let's talk HSL and let's figure out how we can use those colors to really make those splashes that we see pop. The next one that I want to talk about is highlights and shadows. And for that one, I want to use this image. This is from the same morning about an hour prior, and the sun had just rose. However, there was a thick layer of fog up in the mountain. And with that, there was still a lot of light that needed to kind of seep in here. So by default, it was a darker exposure, but I kept it dark because I wanted to kind of keep that drama and that moodiness. Now with highlights and shadows, this is where it can get tricky, but this is where it can get a lot of fun. If you notice here, when I bring down my highlights, you can see what happens to the fog here in the background. It mutes it a lot more. Now, if I bring it up, you can see it emphasizes the fog and it kind of draws my eye into that area specifically. Now, if I want to offset this, I can look at my shadows, and if I want you to pay attention to the trees right here and these limbs, if I bring up my shadows, what you'll notice is now I'm beginning to see some of the details in this area. So without overdoing it, I am going to bring this up a little bit here so I can actually see the limbs on the trees. Then it kind of comes into play of how do I want to go about it with boosting up the fog, as well as if you notice around the fog, take a look at the leaves here and how that's being affected as well. The leaves kind of go from a muted kind of flat look to a lot of emphasis, and there's a lot going on here. If you look between these limbs, there's some color that's kind of reappearing here. There's extra light. It's basically just kind of adding in our own contrast without using the contrast slider. If we jump back over to this image now, and I'll kind of do the same thing here, what you'll notice is if I bring the highlights up in this, you can kind of see where it's affecting the top of these plants, right, or these leaves right here. And if I pick the shadows and I bring it up, you can kind of see I'm getting some more detail below the plants. Now, if I want to kind of really add contrast, I can bring it down and you can see it kind of adds that shadow back and that darker area below. So I kind of like it actually right there. So I'm going to bring down my shadows, but I'm going to kind of keep my highlights up a fair amount as well. And again, let's kind of look at a before and after. Automatically, we're getting a lot more color. I'm super into it. So before we jump into talking about white balance, I want to jump over to this next image, which is from Door County. So this was actually one of my favorite sunsets from this little trip I had up here. And for the sake of, I was shooting way over all of these trees, but the sunlight was hitting just right. So if I expand on these, I want to go to my darker exposure. Now you'll notice here, I can see the sky perfectly, but a lot of the foreground here is muted. I can't see it, it's too dark. So this is kind of where shadows and highlights come into play again. I can always bring down the highlights of the sky so I can get more definition in regards to what time it was, but then I can take the shadows and I can boost that. And now I can actually see a lot more of what's going on here. I can see the golden yellows. I can see the areas where it hasn't changed color too much. I can see all of the different layers in this lush forest that I was seeing. And with just those two sliders, you can see now I have a bit more of an accurate representation of kind of what was going on there. Of course, you can always go ahead and you can bring up your exposure and you can play with your other sliders, but the big focus with fall is balancing your highlights and balancing your shadows to offset and add a bit more of a dynamic light to your photo. The last of the three that I want to talk about today is going to be white balance. For those who are shooting raw, white balance is something that you have the privilege of not needing to worry about in camera when you are shooting. When shooting raw, you can go in and when you're post-processing within Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One or Luminar, whatever you're using to edit, you can adjust your white balance and it's not going to actually alter the photo itself. The data is already retained, so you can actually adjust that as if you were still in camera. So let's say for this photo, I want to go ahead and I want to kind of warm up the sky. I can take my white balance and I can warm up the sky. And I remember there was actually kind of a nice pink glow from the layer of the clouds. So I can bring that back. But the one specifically that I want to hone in on is this shot right here. Whoops, I grabbed the wrong one. There we go. Is this shot right here. Now, when I shot this, I accidentally had my camera set to cloudy. Now, for those who don't know that white balance, cloudy is an extremely warm white balance. So what I need to do actually is I need to kind of cool this down. As much as I love this heavy yellow in here, I know that it wasn't genuinely that warm. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go ahead and I can adjust that white balance and I can bring it back a bit. And it's a bit more accurate to what my eye saw, yet at the same time, I'm still having all of that yellow. If I jump over to the other images that we were working on earlier, which are right here, what you'll notice with this one is I've already adjusted this one. It's already cooler on the blue side and it's already kind of warmer on the magenta side. Now, if I can always have the option with Lightroom where I can switch over from as shot to auto. And what you'll notice here is it will kind of make its own intelligent guess. And similarly so to that, if I undo it, you can see where those two ended up versus what Lightroom thinks is a bit of a cooler shot with a bit more magenta in there. So Lightroom is recognizing that this was shot right at dawn. Now we do know that it's fall though. And what better way to emphasize fall than making a warmer image with a lot more yellow and a lot more orange. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to kind of, I'll say, cheat a little bit and I'm going to warm my photo up a pretty substantial amount. This is what originally Lightroom thought was the right blue. This is kind of what I think is going to emphasize that, hey, this is fall. This is that season. Now I can go ahead and I can basically crop this down to the ratio of like a 4:5 or an 8:10. And I can say, you know what? I like the look of that. Make a few more minor adjustments for my own creative style. And I look at that and I say, you know what? I'm happy with that. I'm going to get a print of it. And that was only going through some of the three main tips that I talked about, which were highlights and shadows, HSL, which is controlling each color individually, and white balance. And with that, we went from this to this in a matter of 15 or so minutes. So now this is where I leave off, and I hope that you guys go ahead and you look at your images. And if you have Lightroom, dive into there. If you don't have Lightroom, run the trial and see what images you can get and what adjustments you can make to yours as well. If you have any desire to share, please post to our Facebook page. Share with our email addresses, info@Camera Company, or my personal one, kruschek@gmail.com, KRUSCHEKCH@gmail.com. Send it over. I'd love to see your images. I'd love to offer any feedback I can. I'm pretty balanced with positive as well as constructive criticism. So for those who tuned in, thanks so much. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week. Till then, happy shooting.